Hey, how's it going everyone? Mekkah here, back with some more unpopular opinions. This time they're your unpopular opinions, because apparently a lot of you have unpopular opinions that you wanted to get out, so thanks for submitting those. I didn't expect that last video to get as big popular as it did, but apparently it did, so hey, I'll just do some more. Where else can we find more unpopular opinions than the comment section? So I just took some from this comment section you could find. I think that video had like hundreds and hundreds of comments, so if I didn't get yours, I'm sorry. I only picked like 15 again, just to make sure the video wouldn't end up like over an hour long. But yeah, we're gonna take a look at those. I'm glad I'm not, the only one who dislikes people who go one-liners and say, well, it's an unpopular opinion, and just don't back it up. I'm glad I'm not the only one annoyed by that, so that is a good mutual feeling, it's easier to suffer through these when you know you're not alone. So thanks for your submissions. I don't know what I'm doing for the next one. I'm definitely doing a next one because people clearly want to see this. So submit yours again in the comment section if you've got some, and I might also look at Strands Forest or Reddit again next time. I don't know yet. We'll see. But don't worry, I'll have plenty to go on either way. So let's get the first one. Unpopular opinion. Having fun is more important than playing optimally. That's not an unpopular opinion. Even the most elitist Fire Emblem player I know, Don151, and I'm saying that jokingly because Don is actually not elitist in the sense that he's a dick. He's just very good at Fire Emblem, and sometimes he likes to show it. But he plays the way he does because that's how he has fun. He doesn't like playing Fire Emblem casually the way most people do. Most people, they play Fire Emblem for fun, and those people are not an exception. So no one thinks having fun is less important than playing optimally. No one does. It is important to use playing optimally as like a standard when you're judging units for like a tier list, I think. Because in those cases, you can't just use your personal casual experience to back up just how good a unit is, because that really invites it opens the door for something dumb like I grinded Amelia in the towers for 5 hours. And then she was really good, so I don't know why she's at the bottom of the tier list, that kind of shit. That's to nip that shit in the butt. That's what it's for. Also, I've seen some people call personal opinions a crutch for some units, and I honestly don't get it. The way I see it, that weapon or item is part of that character and should almost always be seen as a boon, like the Pooji for example. Part of what makes Orson so good is his exclusive access to the Pooji in all its glory. This is how all personal sound should for the most part be treated, as part of that unit's function and nothing but a boon to them. Absolutely. I see a lot of people credit units for their starting inventories for some reason. They'll be like, Louise is good, has a white gem, which is good, or something like Pent has a physics staff, which is good, or like Deke brings the steel blade to the party, or the only thing Guy is good for is his cling edge, and those kind of things are pretty silly. Because obviously you can trade those around, and in order to use the killing edge, I don't have to use Guy. I just need to trade his killing edge, and that's all I need to do. So the only thing I need to do to get the killing edge is recruit Guy, and Guy doesn't do that. Matthew does that. So I usually actually give Matthew credit for getting you the killing edge, funny as it is. But anyway, with personal weapons it's different, because if you don't use a person, then you can't use their personal weapon. It just sits in your convoy doing nothing. Like I can give the Earth Sword to Leaf in FE5, and I will be able to use it. It becomes a little weird when multiple units can use a personal sword, like the Bragi sword in FE5. Multiple people can use those. So in those cases it's a little weird, but yeah, there's no reason to separate the two. I went in on this quite a bit actually on the FE4 Let's Play I'm doing with Mangs, where I brought up the point a lot of people see Shannon as worse than Larse, and by worth I mean worse, because Shannon is the only person who can use the Balmung, and people are like, he relies on the Balmung, but really he doesn't. Even without a Balmung is good, but even if he did rely 100% on the Balmung being good, like let's say his base stats were like 1 across the board, but the Balmung put him at his current stats, it wouldn't matter because the Balmung is his and no one else can use it unless you glitch the game, which is like a very different beast altogether. But generally I don't think glitches should be considered part of a unit's toolkit. I don't think glitches are allowed in when comparing characters generally. I mean, you can play however you want, don't get me wrong, but when you're comparing characters for the sake of a tier list or something like that, then glitches are generally banned. And yeah, it's his personal weapon. Why wouldn't you consider it part of his kit? It's just so strange that people wouldn't do that. So I also don't think that's too unpopular. I do think there's a couple people who like Larse a little bit too much though, and they'll be like, oh, I used the Balmung glitch, but they kind of forget you can't even do that until you get the Valkyrie staff user, which is late chapter 8 at the earliest. So that also means that Shannon until then has Balmung off to himself. Next one we got And by the way, you'll notice I censored all of these once again. You could probably find out who these were if you want to like really go CSI on it. I ask that you don't bother people for their opinions. Just post your own opinions and leave it at that. Don't bother people for having a different opinion than yours. That's just childish and dumb. Anyway, unpopular opinion. I hate that the community refers to the games in the series by chronological number. While I don't consider myself an expert, I've played and finished multiple FEs, yet I can't be arsed to memorize the chronological number of even the ones I've played. It's not that hard to say right out Fates, Sacred Stones, Binding, Blazing, Three Houses, Thracia. I'm sick of having, and it just goes on like this basically. I accidentally didn't screenshot enough of this, but I think you get the point. I get that this might be hard for people who aren't used to it. This was probably a lot easier back when, well, first of all, when they had single digits. And we also didn't have, like, games before FE6, like maybe FE4, FE5, weren't even referred to very much. Like, almost no one talks about FE1 to 3. And yes, I know some of you do, but most people have only played, like, the English releases, and then the slightly more hardcore people have played, like, FE4, FE5, and it generally ends there. But I agree it can be hard on people. I don't know why, if you would hate it or anything. As far as I know, it's not that uncommon in series. Like, for example, I know people talk about Final Fantasy in the same way a lot of the times. Again, not an expert on Final Fantasy by any means. I've seen people talk about Mario games like Mario 2 sometimes, refer to it that way. I've seen people do it for Zelda games. I've seen people do it for Mega Man even. So I know Fire Emblem probably does it a little more often. I also don't think it happens too much anymore lately. I rarely see people refer to Three Houses as FE16, or Echoes as FE15, or Fate as FE14. People generally go, like, the most common way I tend to refer to them, and I think it's pretty common, is you go like FE1 through 10, and then people generally will say like Shadow Dragon. Maybe, like, in text I usually say like FE11, FE12, but a lot of people go like Shadow Dragon, New Mystery, and especially after that, it definitely becomes Awakening. Like, almost no one says FE13. A lot of people say Fates. A lot of people say Three Houses. No one really says the older numbers. Especially newer players who came in with later releases. They are just used to referring to games as like Three Houses and stuff like that. Because, I mean, a lot of people hadn't even really played or heard of Three Houses until the game came out. And, like, why would you refer to it as FE16 if this is the only game you've seen and like played? So, purple censor person, I think you'll be happy with the future, because I think I see fewer and fewer people refer to old games. Now, I do think for FE7, or Fire Emblem Blazing Blade, you'll find a lot of people will use FE7, not just because if you just say Fire Emblem, like the way the game says it, it's very unclear what you mean. You have to, like, clarify. And of course, a lot of people will infer what you mean, because it doesn't have another title. So you just say Fire Emblem, people are like, oh, you mean FE7. But also the game didn't really release an actual subtitle until much later, and then it wasn't even the one that most people were expecting. It was like, and they made it the Blazing Blade, whereas most people were referring to it as the Blazing Sword. So that was also kind of weird. So I will probably be referring to that game as FE7 for the rest of my life. And FE7 and FE8, they just kind of follow logically. FE9 can go either way. The other thing about like these subtitles is for games like Path of Radiance and Genealogy of the Holy War, and especially FE12, New Mystery of Light and Shadow, Heroes of whatever the hell else that game has. Titles are just really long, so sometimes it's just easier to use a number. That's why people do it. They don't do it because they hate you. Trust. Number 3. Unpopular opinion. Edward is one of the best units in Radiant Dawn. Yeah, that is an unpopular opinion, alright? I got you here. Okay. So the thing about Edward, for Radiant Dawn, a lot of people like him, especially people who play normal mode, and I hate that I'm not remembering this properly, but I think in Radiant Dawn, you can't play hard mode on your first playthrough, but I might be confusing it with something else. But, you know, I know you can't do some things in your first playthrough, like there's some New Game Plus stuff in Radiant Dawn. Now the reason this is relevant is because Edward is so much worse on hard mode compared to normal mode. Like, he is like, his stats are like right on that part where in normal mode he can double more quickly, and his avoid is a little more reliable. The weapon triangle exists in normal mode where it doesn't in hard mode, so I guess the axe users early on, Hector, not Hector, I wish it was Hector. Edward is actually significantly worse against axe users in hard mode because it doesn't get the weapon triangle bonus. I'm pretty sure it's 15 in Radiant Dawn too, so it's a pretty significant amount. So Yeah, Edward gets a lot worse. And also I think the enemies just have stronger weapons in hard mode. He gets killed more quickly. So there's a big difference in opinion between people who just play Radiant Dawn only on like a low difficulty and people who like actually enjoy it so much they want to play like hard mode, which I think is understandable. That's where the difference comes on most of the time. And also there's obviously also a difference between people who like growth units and people who, you know, enjoy growth units but know they're not all that good. Not saying that all growth units are bad, but Edward has definitely got some problems in Radiant Dawn, even in normal mode, but they especially hurt him in hard mode, because EXP gain in hard mode is so much worse. You get less bonus experience, and it does less for you, so you effectively get 4 times less than you would in normal mode compared to normal mode in hard mode. You get half as much, and it does half as much. It takes twice as much to get a level up. And the normal experience gain is also usually nerfed, so he grows a lot more slowly. And the Dawn Brigade in general is just very, very screwed in Radiant Dawn. Unfortunate as it is, like the growth units, the growth that Edward has, they don't really do a whole lot for him when he can't level up fast enough. People bring up Zyhark a lot when comparing him to Edward, and they're like, well, Zyhark just makes him useless. I think if Edward was a competent unit in his own right, he wouldn't get overshadowed by Zyhark. A lot of people use one of each class, but if Sword Masters were good enough to where I would want 2 Sword Masters, then Edward would definitely get a spot on my team. But the problem is, he's not just worse compared to Zyhark, he's worse compared to like almost everyone else you get in the Dawn Brigade. Like from chapter 1-6 onwards, or even 1-5 onwards, you get so many good pre-promoted units, and like Nyla and Vogue, who are basically pre-promotes, that there's almost no reason to use Edward for combat. Like, at the start of the game, you don't really have any alternatives, and you have to use Edward for a while. And he's pretty helpful there, simply because if you don't use him, you don't really get anyone else in return. And you can't just have Nolan do all the work, even Soth can't do all the work by himself, so you have to use him to some extent. But later on, there's almost no point to having him face combat. It's like, okay, I can either have Edward 3-hit KO this enemy, maybe with some help from, you know, Leonardo and Meg, or I could just send Soth to this area and he'll clear them all up over the course of 2 turns. So it becomes kind of a pointless unit to use. And it's the unfortunate consequence of the way that Radiant Dawn is balanced, and I'm not saying it's Edward's fault, but he definitely suffers from it from a usefulness perspective. And also the Dawn Brigade just has too few chapters to level up, and even though they get a lot of Laguz chapters, they get 2 Laguz chapters in part 3, where you can get a lot of experience. He's also just so fragile. There's a chance that Edward gets one-shot by Tigers in part 3 if you haven't leveled him enough, so that guy has some issues. He's definitely not one of the best units of Radiant Dawn, so this opinion is probably unpopular. It may be more controversial. I don't know how many people think Edward is good, but yeah, I'm not a good unit. Trust me, he's not. No matter if I don't know if your opinion is necessarily very unpopular, but it is definitely wrong. From a perspective of someone who's like trying to measure how good a unit is compared to other units. Not saying he's not viable in hard mode, you can definitely train him. Mags actually trained him for his run. I don't remember if he survived or not. He definitely did for a while. I just remember some people dying in that run, and I'm not sure exactly who died. I know Nolan died, I know Meg died, I know Aaron died, but I don't know if Edward died. So I can't tell all these scrubs apart. So that's Edward. Number 4. This is a long one. Unpopular opinion. I like Fire Emblem when it's 50% anime. Oh, this is an interesting one. Of course I picked all these ones, but I didn't read them all just now. I like the designs, characters being colorful and having traits that make them easily recognizable, even cute girls and edgelords to a degree. I don't like it when Fire Emblem goes full anime. This is where it's kind of hard to explain, and a lot of people would disagree. I don't like characters that look childish fighting in a war, even if they are or can become powerful mages or ancient dragons or whatever. Every Fire Emblem has a lot of them, and they are usually popular. In my opinion, with the exceptions of Faye and Delthea, Desert of Valencia did anime right when it comes to characters and their interactions. Alms and Celica's initial groups feel like a bunch of young friends getting involved in a war way bigger than them. And later we got a lot of adult characters like Clive and Saber having actual roles in the story. Echoes is not my favorite Fire Emblem game, nor does it contain my favorite characters in the series, but overall it has my favorite cast. So this one has a good exploration of the topic that I definitely want to talk about sometimes, is has Fire Emblem become too anime, which I know is a very loaded topic that I can never properly delve into within the context of this video, especially when I have several more opinions to like cover. But to briefly summarize my stance, I am someone who has been around since, let me think here. So I came into the community when Radiant Dawn was like just released, I think. And I played through like FE7 first, and then like FE8, and then I think FE6, I want to say, maybe Shadow Dragon next, but either way, that's roughly the order of what I went through. the new games, Awakening, like the 3DS emblems, Awakening and Fates, they kind of passed me by at first, but I got that there was some controversy over them. But I think the biggest gap between all the new fans was definitely when Awakening came around. And there was definitely a huge shift in the tone of Fire Emblem. And a lot of people qualify this tone shift that came with Awakening and then, you know, came even further in Fates as more anime, which is not the right term for it. I have since gathered. I have called Fire Emblem 2 anime at some points too. I've been guilty of that. It is a summary of how people feel, but they don't really have the right words to explain exactly what they mean, so they end up using a term that isn't quite covering it. So it's not like a very malicious attempt to like discredit people, but some people, including me, don't really know a whole lot about anime and anime's history and video games history to properly qualify the difference. But I think, on the other hand, a lot of people who go defensive on this tone and say, well, Fire Emblem has always been anime, and they point to like Sigurd and Aris's hair in FE4, for example. They have very anime hair, or some of the older tropes in Fire Emblem, some anime tropes in the older Fire Emblems. There you go again, overgeneralizing. But the point is here, there is a tonal shift in Fire Emblem, and it's definitely more noticeable in Awakening and Fates than it was in the games before. There's definitely a gap between them, and Three Houses still has a bit of it. It toned it down a little bit to the point where it's more normal, but you can't really look at Three Houses the same way. You can't really say Three Houses is like anime in the same way that old Fire Emblem games have. And I really lack the knowledge to properly delve into what the difference is, because I'm not an anime watcher. I don't know anything about what even qualifies as an anime. But I just know there's a lot of people out there that lack the vocabulary basically to explain exactly what they mean when they say it's less anime. But that also, they just get annoyed whenever someone goes, yeah, Fire Emblem was always anime. But, you know, when a game like Awakening comes around and puts the focus completely on relationships between characters, shipping characters, pairing characters, put an avatar in the game that you can pair with the other characters, have first-person perspective views of as supports, first-person cutscenes involving a player avatar in the scene, pandering with, you know, maybe not Robin as much, but like Chris and Corrin. There is definitely a difference, and maybe to anime is not the right term for it, but there is definitely something there, and I definitely want to explore it some more, but I need some other people's help in here, because I suck at explaining it. I'm not the right person to explain it, but I still want to make a video about it, because it's a super interesting topic, and it's also super controversial, so it's great for views. Seriously though, it's an interesting topic. But I know, for example, Sanyo, Jake, Mags' designer, editor, knows a lot more about this kind of stuff. Even Mags like watches more anime than I do. The only anime I've ever watched is like, I guess the Pokemon anime, like Dragon Ball Z, that's about it. I do agree though that, for example, Faye and Althea are very good examples of what I dislike about modern Fire Emblem. One more thing I want to say about this is a lot of people, they qualify post-Awakening characters as like tropey, one-note characters, and everyone before that, it's implied that those are more in-depth. Of course, it doesn't work like that. Of course, there are characters from before that are tropey, one-note characters, and of course, there are characters in Awakening and post-Awakening that, you know, appear one-note but actually get more depth in their supports. There's a bit of a silver lining here. I do think that pre-Awakening, this thing that, you know, characters, the one-notey thing, they were less in number. They were the exception, not the norm. And I feel like I got to know characters a little better outside of their supports. I got a good feel of who they were without thinking they were all about one thing. Whereas that is definitely something that stood out to me with Awakening and Fate's characters. I didn't have the feeling that, like, a lot of people praise Three Houses characters for appearing to be one-note, tropey kind of characters with only like one or two defining characteristics, and then when you go into their supports, they turn out to be very deep. And I don't think that's something worth praising very much. Like, okay, so it's better than just one-note cello characters, don't get me wrong, that's a lot better, but the characters from previous Fire Emblem games generally left me not with the feeling, oh, this character's all about one or two things. Again, there's exceptions, like FE7 Foreigner, for example, all about money, yeah, I can get that, but the more nuanced, the more, you know, chill characters from these games, it generally didn't give me that vibe, whereas Awakening, it definitely does. And I'm not exactly sure what the pinpoint is on, but I know I'm not the only one with that feeling, because this is basically all that was being talked about when Awakening was a new game, and it came up again with Fates, and you know, Fates debates are still huge today for a good reason. There is like Too Long Didn't Read. There is a tonal shift. People just aren't qualifying it exactly right, and as a result, people yell at each other because you know people are very passionate about this. Next one. Yes. Someone linked the timestamp. I can't really link that right now. Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn Part 4 is literally a fee guide. Take a look at one of the maps in Part 4. And this is the map with well, Radiant Dawn spoilers coming up. Skip ahead, like I don't know. Skip ahead if you don't want Radiant Dawn spoilers. This kind of map has bad map design, horrible enemy placement, and variety. Not that in the rest of the game there it is, but the situation gets even worse in Part 4. Extremely high numbers of enemies, which makes the game more time-consuming and actually difficult. There are some mechanics the game doesn't tell you in advance, and you might have doing the chapter again, only for not knowing in advance that important piece of information. For example, the fact that Ashira can heal herself if you finish her with any character besides Ike. So I don't know how much of this is like a criticism of like Radiant Dawn and Gaiden, because it doesn't really read like something that is necessarily a bad thing overall. Like sure, the line about like bad map design, horrible enemy placement, and variety, that's definitely a criticism I can see. And yeah, that map that you're referring to, that's not a very, very, very good map, I will say. But I will say this, it is a very short map. Once you know how to play it, it is one of the shortest maps in the game, and replaying it because you did something wrong doesn't really take all that long. You can take a long time killing all the spirits individually, and like killing them as reinforcements over and over, but you were given like so many tools to get through this part quickly. Rearranging your skills, you have a Heron. So many characters don't even get attacked by those spirits, so you can use those in clever ways. That map isn't very long, so having to replay it, and the same goes for the map after that, Rebirth 5, which you also kind of refer to. I'm saying you as if I'm talking to this person. I don't know why I suddenly shifted to that, but I did. But like the map after that, the Ashira map, also isn't like very, very long. It's like when I played, it's like 2 or 3 turns. A lot of people will probably take longer because they don't exactly optimize their army, which is fine. Everyone plays their own way, blah, blah, blah. But the point is, like, the chapter doesn't feel very unfair to me. There's some things it doesn't tell you in advance, but it definitely does imply to an extent that you have to finish off Ashira with Ike. And if you missed that, then, you know, you could just try again next turn if you survive. And, you know, even if you don't, you could just replay the chapter. It's the final map. It's supposed to be a bit of a challenge. I think that's fine. There are some mechanics the game doesn't tell you about. Like, you're probably referring to the part where, you know, the Rebirth 4 map boss doesn't die. Or rather, he doesn't die if one of the spirits can save his life, basically, is what I'm trying to refer to, without trying to make it too spoilery. But, you know, like, even if you attack him, and a spirit takes the hit for him, you aren't being set back anymore, unless you were, like, really counting on the boss dying that turn, I guess. But generally, that boss, you know, you're still chipping away at what is basically a health bar for him. Like, imagine, I'm trying to think of another example. Imagine that boss in Cinder Shadows, where he summons, like, those puppets. And those puppets, they, like, if you kill them, that also takes away, it's like, I'm gonna explain this partly. The point is, bosses that use other enemies as, like, shields for them, like FE12 Medius does this too, you still kill those shields for him. So you still make progress, even if they end up shielding for him. So it's much more forgiving than anything else. Anyway, the point is, this map isn't even like, it's not the pinnacle of map design. I don't think it's horrible. And Part 4 in general, in Radiant Dawn, is not like well designed. It's mostly made so you can grind your team up for the tower, which, you know, it's not super interesting. But at the same time, it does have some of my favorite music, and I don't even mind the maps that much. I actually think the Oliver map is interesting. It's very enemy spammy, but it's also interesting to go through it as quickly as possible, because you are given the tools to kill enemies quickly in Ike and Nyla, and whoever else you happen to train up. So I do think it has interesting parts to it, but I agree they're not for everyone, and that's definitely not an unpopular opinion. Not a whole lot of people like Radiant Dawn's endgame, but at the same time, I think it scratches a certain itch that's missing from a lot of Fire Emblems, particularly Fire Emblem 7 in my opinion, where you are given the opportunity to train up a huge army of units throughout the game, but you rarely face any challenge because the enemies are so weak. But Radiant Dawn gives you a chance to not only train units that have been fallen behind, but they also give you the opportunity to, you know, flex the muscles of the characters that you've trained up for in Part 4 in like 5 pretty big endgame maps. They can take a pretty long time if you're taking them slowly. So, like, for example, Endgame 3 of Radiant Dawn, that one really allows you to, like, use your characters to your full extent, because there's some really powerful enemies in there that you gotta fight. And I think Radiant Dawn does that pretty well. So, next one is Three Houses isn't very good. Very unpopular opinion. Because the game is very popular. I think it's more controversial, this game. Three Houses is definitely has been a little divisive. Not as divisive as Awakening and Fates, but there's definitely a lot of people that don't like a lot of the things that it did. I think it's because the game does some things really well and then does a lot of other things fairly poorly, or in a way that's considered like below our standards, and it kind of Max is making a huge video about it. I don't know when it's going to be out. It might be out before this video is, but if it is out, then you can check it out. If it's not out, then look forward to it, because it's going to be a very interesting video. Anyway, apparently the reclassing system is a joke because class balance is a joke. Yes, that's always been the case, but in previous games you couldn't make everyone any class. Map design is awful down there with Awakening. Open fields and linear hallways everywhere, and most of them get reused regularly. Enemies are really bland, almost FP4 bland, and not placed in any interesting way. I don't remember anyone disagreeing with this. There are maps in Three Houses that are good. I like the ones that have like 25 turn limits placed on them. Those, I think Chapter 4 and Chapter 6, especially in Manding, I think are interesting. Not that they're like completely examples of great design, but they were definitely more interesting in Manding than they were in Hard, and that made me think, you know, they might be designed for Manding, or maybe they just work better in Manding by accident. But either way, there are interesting maps, but they are the vast minority. Most of it is like, yeah, here's a huge place. Like, even the indoor maps are generally just open fields with a very wide hallways, in my opinion. The story is a mess that relies on easy tragedy to be emotionally satisfying. Yeah, this is something that other Fire Emblem games are sometimes guilty of as well. Three Houses, like the Gerald scene, for example, is... I'm not saying it's not tragic at all, but I found the aftermath of the scene much more interesting than the scene itself. And I don't really... like, I have trouble connecting with Byleth. I think he's a terrible character. And a horribly boring perspective for the story overall. So that, like, really makes me not care very much about Gerald's death. It's also embarrassingly incomplete in every route besides Azure Moon. It could be good if it was finished, maybe, but it doesn't matter. You could say something similar about Fates. Yeah, like a phrase a lot of people throw around when it comes to Fates is unfinished potential, incomplete potential. What's it called? Either way, it has more potential, basically. It had more potential than it was. And the same goes for Three Houses. They didn't have enough time to finish the game clearly, and as a result, they took a lot of shortcuts. And, you know, I'm glad the game is as good as it is, but it really hurts to see that something that they could have been a lot better, because it was already delayed like 2 times for like a year or half a year each. So clearly they didn't want to just deliver an unfinished product, but at the same time, Three Houses is an unfinished product. It's kind of amazing that the game did as well as it did in its unfinished state when you think about it. Like, imagine how much worse it would be if it wasn't delayed, or how much better it could have been had delayed it even further. But then we just probably just collectively been like, oh my god, this is taking way too long. Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot of hot take left on Three Houses map design or how incomplete it is. I think that horse is almost dead at this point, but it's still a really fun game. I just don't think, like I've said from the start, or not from the start, but like after I finished the game for the first time, I've said, you know, this game is really fun, but I don't think I'm gonna put it in my top 5 of Fire Emblem games of all time ever. Like, I just don't think it deserves to be up there. It's not that other games are flawless or anything, but I just feel like I like them more and they feel more complete to me. I don't know if I could name better games off the top of my head. Personally, I like FE5 a lot better, but I know a lot of that is just attachment to the game. It wasn't even my first game, but it's just still my favorite despite Three Houses coming out. And, you know, it was a lot of fun. Like, it was mostly fun because it was new, but it's not exactly fun because it's super, super engaging all the way through. I just enjoyed the optimization aspect of it quite a bit. I think at this point I must have like 600 hours into Three Houses, but I haven't tracked the hours into other games, so it doesn't really mean anything. I'm trying to think what other games I like better than Three Houses. I definitely like, I enjoy 7 more because it was my first game, I think. I mean, I've made fun of FE7's both gameplay and story countless times, but I still enjoy it more than Three Houses in some ways. I don't know if it's a better game overall, it probably isn't. FE8 I have a very special connection to for some reason. I think I like that one overall better too. I think it executed what it tried to do better. Three Houses is very ambitious, but when you don't complete your ambitions, I think that docks you some points. Whereas FE8, it just did what it wanted to do, did it well. FE6 I'm not entirely sure about. That game can be a very huge drag at times. So I don't know if I would qualify that one as better than Three Houses. FE6 has some unfinished, it's a little rough around the edges too. But for example, Shadow Dragon, I think, is also a much more complete game than Three Houses. But again, it's also not a very ambitious game, so it's tough to say. FE4, I definitely have a bigger attachment to than Three Houses. So yeah, those are some games that I think are, for me personally, competitive with how good Three Houses is. But that's very personal. Next one. I think Fire Emblem would be more fun and less of an RNG fest if level ups were preset, meaning for like Seth or something, he always gets strength on level 1, then always strength and defense on level 2, and so on, for every individual character rather than being random every time. That way the game could design itself more specifically around enemy character stats, as it knows that every player unit will have certain stats at a certain level, and also the game couldn't randomly become significantly more difficult or easy depending on the RNG. So yeah, we talked the last time about growth in Fire Emblem kind of ruining map difficulty mostly. It either results in the games being too easy because they don't want to make it too hard and like too specific on what characters you have to use at what levels, or it becomes too hard and it just becomes a stat fest and a slog fest. It's kind of hard to find it in between because players play so differently, and that's one of the fun things about Fire Emblem, is you can play it so differently every time. The problem with this approach though is a lot of people enjoy the RNG aspect. They might curse it a lot. They may be like, oh my god, I hate the RNG so much. I got 2 empty level ups in a row. Oh my god, I hate it. But really people love it. People love the unpredictability. Like drawing a parallel to Pokemon for a moment. Almost every competitive Pokemon player I know hates critical hits the moment they get them, or the moment they get them used against them. They'll go like, sorry, I crit you in a tournament battle, or they'll get critical hit after, you know, using a Calm Mind or burst 6 times in a row, or they're about to sweep a team but they get crit by like a priority move or something like that. That shit happens and everyone hates it, but every time someone, you know, suggests a non-hacks mode, like a critical hits turned off mode for Showdown, there's like no enthusiasm for it because everyone still enjoys the vanilla game too much, and RNG is part of the game, and in the end people enjoy that aspect, or otherwise they would play something different. Otherwise people would probably play chess or something else with more predictability. So I think this kind of mode would work well for Fire Emblem for the players that play, you know, that like planning ahead, that like making decisions. The thing is, those kind of things are very hard to do when you're already playing blindly, and every player plays at least one Fire Emblem blindly. Like almost every Fire Emblem is played blindly by every player at least once generally, unless you like spoiling yourself, which some people do, but a lot of people don't. People like playing blindly most of the time, and if you can't plan these ahead, then this stuff might as well be RNG almost. Like, you can know it's good to get Seth a couple more points of strength, but you don't know what kind of benchmarks it needs to reach. So your distribution of XP is going to be slightly random in your first playthrough. So it's not going to do a whole lot. And then also just people like characters having turned out differently. Like, my FE felt Iron Man before it ended, rest in peace. One of the most fun things about it was the fact that Barcher got like 7 out of 9 speed level ups in his first level ups. And that was insane. And that's part of what made the run so much fun and so fun to react to and so fun to have. Good characters turning out bad and vice versa is just a fun part of Fire Emblem. They wouldn't have it any other way. I think it's interesting as a mode. Path of Radiance had it. It had fixed mode. It wasn't exactly like the way you're saying. It was more like characters kind of grew according to their averages. And you could slightly modify it by attacking different kinds of enemies and using different kind of weapons. Those had like minus plus 5% changes, but generally people just end up roughly around their averages. It's fun for when you don't want to be RNG screwed, but you also won't be RNG blissed. So it kind of weighs both ways. It's fun for something like an LTC playthrough where you need to plan your things out meticulously, but I don't think it's for everyone. I would like it as a mode though, don't get me wrong, and it doesn't seem like very hard to implement. There's like countless hacks of Fire Emblem games, like mostly on the GBA with fixed growths. There was also a pessimistic mode available, a patch on FE Universe for I think all GBA Fire Emblem games. I think it's called pessimistic mode. I don't remember who made it, but that one is like you level up in a stat only if you have like a 90% plus chance to level up in that stat. So for the first level ups you generally get nothing, and then only like after like 4 or 5 level ups you start getting stats. And it's basically saying like it's almost trying to counter the point that LTC playthroughs rely on level ups, and while at the same time not trying to be as, you know, ridiculous about it as 0% growth, because 0% growth is so unlikely to happen in a normal, you know, playthrough, but pessimistic growth is almost realistic, according to some people anyway. Some people will always claim they just get unlucky all the time. But anyway, the point is, Irisa is doing a fun playthrough of that kind of patch, and it shows how unreliant you can be on level ups if you want to be. and I will link stuff in the description if I remember, but I might not, because this is a long video. Alright, next, here's my unpopular opinion. Reddit is an abysmal website that encourages toxic behavior to everyone involved. So, I will say the Reddit upvote downvote mechanism and like can turn Reddit's like subreddit into a huge ass echo chamber that doesn't allow opinions that go against the hive mind, and that's almost by design, and that does annoy me. At the same time, I think Reddit gets a lot of crap, and certain Reddit communities get a lot of crap. First of all, the YouTube comment section often isn't like any better than Reddit anyway. It has the same upvote and downvote buttons and the top comment and everything. And YouTube comments, everyone knows that a lot of YouTube comment sections get very toxic anyway. So people on YouTube have no room to complain. Now, okay, so let's say you agree with that, or like you don't agree with that, whatever. Let's say you agree both are toxic. I also think like Reddit gets too much crap because despite the annoying functionality of Reddit as a website, as an algorithm and everything else, it still has good communities. Generally the smaller communities are the better ones, but for example the Fire Emblem subreddit I generally like. Sure, there's a lot of fan art because those get easy upvotes. People just look at the art, they think, oh, it's pretty, give an upvote, and they move on. But it has some good discussion threads too. It has room for disagreeing opinions. Some people will downvote, like they always will, because some people are just petty like that. An example of a subreddit that I really don't like right now is, for example, the Harry Potter subreddit. I've had several posts made there that are like not even very critical of Harry Potter, but just like, hey, why did this character do that? That seems kind of weird. And you answer that, like, honest question, and it still get downvoted because, I don't know, some people just perceive it as criticism or whatever. Those kind of subs suck, but the Fire Emblem subreddit, to me, has never really been like that. Generally, it does a good job of just weeding out toxic people. And it's usually just a pretty fine community. People give Reddit a lot of crap. But sure, it is a hive mind. I'm not gonna lie, it's not gonna hive mind, but so is the whole Fire Emblem community sometimes. When it comes to certain things, like remember when Marcus is a Jagan and don't give him EXP was like the main thing, and everyone agreed with that, and everything else was downvoted. Or remember those Fire Emblem 4 fusion posts. Remember the Ike versus Kieran debate? That didn't have Reddit system, but it still had a very toxic community. So all I'm saying is the system isn't the only thing at fault. The community and the people itself also make a big difference. Generally, I think the Fire Emblem Reddit community is pretty fine. Next one. Unpopular opinion. There is absolutely nothing wrong with how Chris from FE12 is treated story-wise. Given the events he takes part in and what he does, he more than any other avatar actually earns the filleting he gets. A lot of the games in the series that are considered too easy aren't actually too easy. The Fire Emblem fanbase is just used to poorly, unfairly designed games. The second one is probably shorter, so I'll get into that first. So let's take Sacred Stones as an example, or like Path of Radiance. I think those games are just easy for people who have already played another Fire Emblem game. For people who play Fire Emblem for the first time, there's a huge learning curve. It's a very numbers-heavy game. A lot of information is presented at once, and taking it all in, understanding, exactly how the battle forecast works, how the grid system works, how movement works, constitution, all that kind of stuff is pretty complicated. So for most people, their first Fire Emblem game will be pretty difficult. I know for me, FE7, not exactly a difficult game. Still struggle with it a lot of the first time until I tried to actually pay attention to things. So that was learning experience. And once I realized how FE7 works, FE8 was fairly easy for me as far as I remember. Still kind of annoying, because playing a game blindly always, puts you in some corner somewhere. I will say that as you've played more and more Fire Emblem, veterans will probably fairly quickly figure out how to break a certain game, as long as the mechanics aren't too different. Three Houses have very different mechanics, so it took a while for people to realize exactly how to break the game. But once they did, it was also pretty easy. Like, what you gotta realize is that Fire Emblem games, overall, when they're easy, they can still be fun. But some people, they like the challenge of it, and then it's very hard to actually scratch the itch of that challenge in a lot of these games, because you have to make your own fun for it. And so you have to, like, restrict yourself more than anything else, instead of the game making a good difficulty for you. I think a lot of people are like kind of missing that kind of difficulty that, for example, Conquest and FE12 represented kind of well, but almost no other game can really do it. Like FE11, Art 5 to some extent, but it kind of ends there when it comes to like well-designed difficulty, in my opinion. Now the other one, about Chris in New Mystery. Almost everyone hates Chris, and I am one of almost everyone. I hate him too. I think this person is missing the very important ingredient. Chris comes in a story that already existed without him. takes over lines and moments from other characters, just basically to have, well, a player insert, just to make the player feel better about themselves, instead of, you know, actually telling the story the way it was made. It just kind of vandalizes it almost, and that's one thing that people really don't like Chris for, me included. And also just the the player fellatio, as people like to call it, and the earning of it are two separate things. It is a bigger problem if it's unearned. I think the best example that people usually think of is Korn. The fact that he leads the army of Hoshido and or Nor in Conquest, despite the fact that Xander and Ryoma are there to do it instead, or other more qualified people. That is a criticism, but it's not the whole thing. It's also just how easy and how much of a shortcut it is writing-wise to make the avatar, you know, be the most important person in the universe, make the player feel good about themselves. It is a lazy form of writing, and it is very unnecessary in Fire Emblem, and it doesn't really add very much to it, because I'd much rather have real characters with real personalities that I can invest in and feel bad for when something bad happens, feel good for them when something good happens. And with the avatar, it feels so artificial to me that I can't really get into it. So two separate issues that are kind of being treated as one in this one, and that is probably why it's an unpopular opinion, because there's a lot more to it than just simply saying Chris is bad because there's some flating going on. I'm never going to say that word again. I feel dirty now. Number 10. There's actually one comment that I'm really going to push back up. The defense of FE4 being slow by virtue of your own virtual console to speed it up. I think you have a lot of good critiques and counter arguments for the FE4 part of the video, but the reason I don't like this one is because it's a different mindset, or you need to play the game differently. It's third-party developers gave you the ability to not make it slow, which kind of dismisses a legitimate critique of FE4. I don't think that FE4 is dumb and slow because I don't use it many units at a time, because it's true that the game runs slowly. To me, it's like when people complain that you can't save a Majora's Mask without resetting the timeline, people respond to save on a virtual console. It's just dismissive of an actual issue in the game. Other than that, solid videos as always, Mekkah. So, nice comment, good support. I will say, I agree that it's actually a valid criticism that FE4 plays slowly. And when you can't speed it up when you play it on console, that sucks, and it makes it less enjoyable. I think it's a fair critique of Fire Emblem 4 as a game, as it was put out by the developers. However, I don't think it's a good reason not to play the game, and that's where the emulator speed up solution comes in. Sometimes people nowadays, you try to convince someone to play FE4 and they're like, I don't know, man, it's kind of slow. And you can bring up the idea of emulator speed up to say, hey, the game is kind of slow sometimes, but you can speed it up with, you know, tab or space or whatever it is in your spacebar, whatever it is in your emulator. And usually it's tab for me, because that's the default for SNES 9X. So it's more of a thing you use to convince people to play it, to like trick them into playing it, than that it actually like solves a design issue with the game. But like 90%, 99% of people nowadays, they play FE4 in emulator because it just wasn't brought out in English. People want to play it with the translation patch, and then emulator speed up is an actual thing. It doesn't excuse the fact that the game feels slow sometimes, but it is a practical solution to a problem that the game has. I'm sure there's a lot of things like this, like FE4, for example, like Chaz brought this up in a video once. It lets you save every turn, so you don't have to redo like entire chapters ever, which makes it a lot faster. Or what you could even do is use emulator save states to get you back where you started, which is the same thing, but it saves you the time of, you know, resetting the console and even like loading up a menu. Although I think if you hold start, you end up where you like reset the game anyway. But the point is, it's a lot faster on emulator, and a lot of people play on emulator, so you might as well take advantage of it instead of whining that it isn't possible. A lot of people are looking for excuses not to play the older Fire Emblems because they seem hard to get into, but trust me, if you haven't already, it's worth it. Yeah, but thanks for the nice comment otherwise. It's nice when people acknowledge, like, okay, I have a difference of opinion, let me, you know, carefully put it out there, without making it personal. That's always good. Number 11. Unpopular opinion, Corrin is not inherently a bad character. Most of what's wrong with Corrin is actually more related to everyone in the whole world of Fates being in love with them, rather than Corrin actually being unlikable. Had the spotlight been on more logical leaders during Fates' story with Corrin in a supporting role, they would possibly been better received. Maybe. I don't like getting into arguments of what if, because execution is so much more important than just a good concept in Fire Emblem and storytelling in general. People will praise something like FE7's story for being good in concept, but if the execution sucks, then like it doesn't really help my experience a whole lot that the concept was good. You know, I'm all for trying out good concepts, but we don't know how they would have done if they had changed that one thing. Maybe something else would have been really cringy. So I find that kind of logic kind of like, you can't prove or disprove that. So what is the point of talking about it? But Corn and the World of Fates are so integrated with each other, so mingled with each other in how they were received, and also just how they are perceived through the game when you play it. Like, because the World of Fates revolves around Corn, it's pretty hard to separate the two, and for that reason I can't really go along with this kind of an unpopular opinion. Again, keep in mind, Fates is a very popular game. It still is. A lot of the people who really like it, they try not to be very vocal about it because they know like a lot of people will like get on their case about it. Don't get on the case of people who like Fates, but I mean, like, sometimes people will try to deafen critique of Fates by saying, well, I liked it, and you're just being mean and beating a dead horse, which is kind of silly, because, you know, we're just critiquing a game. Can't handle that, and then why you want on the internet, you know? Like, you're not a bad person for liking Fates. Not at all. Not at all, but I think pretending that it isn't a step down in some very significant ways in Fire Emblem is definitely not true to what it is. But yeah, this opinion in particular is like I've only seen the story of each Fates branch once, you know, like a full playthrough, and then I watched it again during my Conquest Let's Play, and then I'm like halfway through Revelations, over halfway through Revelations as far as I know, and it's been so long since I saw Birthright, so I can't really point to concrete evidence. There's actually a series of Fates critiques on the subreddit right now that could be interesting to read. If you're up for that, someone's like going through Fates chapter by chapter and actually not just going, this is bad, but actually providing solid criticism of the thing. I can't speak for the content of those posts because I haven't read them in depth, but the guy looks like they're putting effort into it. I have no idea who it was again. I might have to search for it. But, you know, it does happen. That's an example of a good thing that's happening on a Fire Emblem subreddit. It's not just a circle jerk of Fate's bad, 3 houses good. Not even a circle jerk of 3 houses bad. It's just, it's people with different opinions, and they don't get silenced into an echo chamber. Trust. 12. One of the last ones. Not even sure if this is unpopular, but I quite like the way that FE7 handled the whole self-insert thing. You have a tactician, a viewpoint for the player who orders the characters around in-universe and doesn't do any actual fighting themselves. Their interaction with the story is kept to a relative minimum, and they're never even really affiliated with the characters. Whenever you see them on the map, they're green, and once the characters are done with their respective stories, they part ways. Moral of the story, you're a green unit. So, okay, so in a way, I can go along with people that say that Mark is the best way to handle a self-insert, but that's basically saying it's best done to just not do it at all, because Mark basically doesn't matter. He's just not there most of the time. You can ignore him. The game can be played without making an avatar, and it makes no difference whatsoever. And I think we have to be a little careful by saying we like this, because it's completely pointless, and there's still some really, really stupid pandering that goes on in FE7's avatar thing. I'm not even talking about like Lin mode, and how Lin is like a proto-confession moment with Mark, the tactician's name. But also think of like the ending of FE7, the tactician ending. Let me actually look it up on Strange Force right now, because it's pretty funny. What it comes down to is when you get a ranking FE7, depending on what you got, you get an ending for your tactician as well, which is uncommon when they're not playable. But in fact, I think Mark is the only character you can play with out of all the self-inserts. Let me see. Character endings. Let me read it out real quick because it's funny as shit. There we go. Okay, so assuming you get the highest ranking, I'm pretty sure you need that. It says, Mark, superb mind. A tactician whose brilliance was changed the course of history. Byrne and Etruria so desired the skilled mind that they went to war. And keep in mind, this is after FE7. So somewhere between FE7 and FE6, they just retconned an extra war in there between Byrne and Etruria. I'm not sure if they're trying to refer to the events of FE6 actually being caused by Mark, or if they just made up an additional war in addition to what happened in FE6. I'm leaning towards the latter, actually. But that is fucking weird and stupid that an entire war is waged over a single tactician and wanting them to be on their side. The whole concept of that is stupid. It's so dumb I don't even need to explain it. So be careful when you're praising Mark, because he is not a good character. They're barely a character, but when they give him something, it's terrible like this. I do like that also that they also bash him when you have a bad ranking. It's like, The bad ending is like, Mark, suspect mind. To this day, historians look back and question how these incomprehensible strategies ever led to victory. So, at least they show both sides of the coin here. Nowadays, all these Salvans are just praised no matter what. Alright, next. This one is part of a numbered comment. And apparently I didn't find 1 through 4 enough to like highlight, and I was afraid it was getting too long. So I picked 2 that I thought would be interesting to talk about. Or rather, and now that I'm looking at it, it's not even that interesting. But it's an example of an unpopular opinion that I don't think is unpopular at all. So, exploration in 3 houses quickly gets old, and I would rather if they let you do everything through the menu, collecting items, farming, quests, etc. Just let me get to the map right away. I'm trying to find people who disagree, but I can't find any. I'm sorry, this is not an unpopular opinion. Almost everyone thought this basically after their first playthrough, like somewhere during part 2 probably. They probably were like, damn, this is getting really fucking boring. Fire Emblem Warriors has a terrible roster. There's no excuse for it. None. Again, like, go back. I don't know if you were around when Fire Emblem Warriors first came out. You were in the subreddit or anywhere else. People fucking hated how much Fates was in it. Mostly Fates Awakening. It's honestly mostly Fates. Even Awakening doesn't have that many representatives, I think. It's like Braum, Lissa, Frederick, and I can hardly think of anyone else. it's mostly those. And it's mostly those making... Oh, Robin, right. And I guess, I mean, it has some villains from it. It has, what's his face? Validar. But it has a villain from like every game, I think. It's not, yeah. Warriors was... I get why they did what they didn't do, but their PR was terrible. Like, I remember at one time, people were like hoping that someone like Ephraim or Hector would be in, or like all their lords. And they had like a limited space on the roster, and they were like, okay, if we did all the lords, there would be too many swords. So we're not gonna do that. And instead, they just decided to go with the roster that they had, which has almost all swords. And then they also added the twins from the Warriors, you know, what the fuck are their names? Liana and the other dumbass. And they also have swords. And that didn't work out very well, did it, for their diversity? Because there's like almost no axe users, almost no lance users. All the lance users outside of DLC are the Pegasus Knights. The axes is like, it's just Frederick and the Wyverns, like just Camilla basically, Lissa, and that's basically it. So that kind of sucked. It has a pretty bad roster overall. They were like, well, we didn't want to put Roy or Iking because we were saving those for a sequel and shit like that. Their PR team was terrible. The game is still fun. I actually want to play it like again on stream or something, just to chill and have fun with it. It's a stupid ass game, but it is a lot of fun, even though it is very, very Fates heavy, way too Fates heavy. Alright, one of the last ones. Telling the enemy, hey, we're gonna send some surprise troops from the south at you is just dumb. I don't get why the player should know that. I know it's fiction, but it's still dumb. It's called ambush for a reason. So this is a case of where Fire Emblem has to walk the balance between what will make the most sense and what would, for gameplay, what will make the most sense for characters, story, and the behavior of various characters. And obviously this case of like a boss yelling at his subordinate like, alright, the troops are coming in from the south soon, right? And the soldier's like, yes sir, that works. And I remember this comment actually had quite a few good replies to it. It was like, sometimes they instead go, where one of your characters, the player characters, goes like, hey, we scouted back and there's a lot of enemies coming. Like, think of like New Mystery Chapter 6, the one where you're sieging the castle with the cancer guy in it, what's his face, Lang. Frey and Norn come in and they're like, okay, there's reinforcements coming behind us, so we better hurry up. That's perfect in my opinion, because those characters have good reasons to say that shit. So you can be more subtle than that. Like I remember in another FE12 chapter, I think it's like 17 or so, or 16, where a boss basically explains the whole gimmick of the entire chapter to one of his subordinates, just so the player can see it. They go like, all right, let's wait here. We're inside the throne room where we're keeping it closed, but the moment they open a chest, we're gonna open up the door and rush out with our reinforcements. And that is almost fourth wall breakingly stupid, but I'm still okay with it. And I'm okay with it because not everything needs to be in service of the story and the characters or realism. Sometimes the gameplay has to take precedence over a completely realistic scenario, and it's not even that unrealistic that the boss gives his subordinates the orders to, you know, hold until something happens, until they've sprung the chest basically. It's a little weird, but it doesn't really take me out of it. Like there's much bigger fish to fry in Fire Emblem in my opinion than this kind of stuff. And when I think of like, it's still better than an ambush reinforcements being completely out of nowhere. I like it when they give a general location of where they're coming from. The better they integrate it with the story, the better, obviously. But I don't even have huge issues with, like, Arma 6 Chapter 7, you know, that really difficult Ostian City chapter, where the boss is like, alright, these guys are going to get rushed by reinforcements from the south soon. It's like, it's okay, it's a warning. Sure, that makes the boss look laughably evil, or saying that exact kind of shit. But I think it's okay. I think it's fine. It's like, it's slightly stupid. It's like 50% anime, I guess is a way you could put it if you're lacking the proper vocabulary once again. But I don't have a huge issue with it. I don't think it's that big of a problem. There's bigger fish to fry, basically. Alright, and then we got a last one, which is not an unpopular opinion, but I wanted to show it off anyway, just because you guys are awesome. Someone posted, oh fuck, I'm in this and I disagree with like 80% of what I said years ago. Why must you remind me of this? I know that feeling. I've looked back at my old posts on several things and been like, oh my god, why did I write that? That's stupid. Why did I go along with that? That's stupid. So, hey, if you can admit you were wrong in the past and you're no longer wrong, that is much better than never being able to admit you're wrong ever, which is something a lot of the people on the internet are suffering from. So, I'm glad my comment section is better than this. Overall, pretty good haul, I would say. Let me know in the comments what other hot-ass opinions you want me to give your take on or talk about in general, because this is just a really nice excuse for me to talk about topics I never really get to talk about in depth. So leave more of these and tell me where to get more if you want me to. If you want me to take them from the comment section again, or from Reddit, or from Strengthsforce, or someone else, that's fine. I'm not going to look for them on Facebook. Fuck Facebook. If you know what it is. If you don't, congrats. You're of a good generation. And I will see you guys next time. Peace, goodbye, and staying popular.